Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. My name is Dean Jones. This is Season 8, Episode 5. I had a really wonderful time talking to my guest, Caroline Wright. She was a really fun person to talk to, and it was just a joy to get a chance to talk to her about her life and career. That doesn't mean that the conversation didn't get very serious, and we had some really poignant things to talk about, as she is a cancer survivor. And she had a lot to say about that, especially about her writings regarding that and how it was to be a mother and wife dealing with cancer. I really want to take you to my conversation with Caroline Wright, who is a very established food writer, former television producer, and veteran of Martha Stewart's Omnimedia. Her recipes and articles appear regularly online in national lifestyle publications including Bon Appétit, Food and Wine, Food Network, Everyday with Rachael Ray, The Kitchn, and Food 52, among others. You're going to love this episode as much as I did recording it, so I'll take you right to it.
Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today, I'm very happy to have on my podcast Caroline Wright, who is a cookbook author, former food television producer, and veteran of Martha Stewart Omnimedia. Her recipes and articles appear regularly online and in national lifestyle publications, including Bon Appetit, Food and Wine, Food Network, Everyday with Rachael Ray, The Kitchn, and Food 52. Caroline, I want to thank you for being on the program.
Thank you. Thank you for so much for having me.
Now, Caroline, for our listeners who are not familiar with you or your work, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself as a bio?
Sure. Well, I like to say I'm a cookbook author, children's book author, and mom. Also, now I'm a soup lady too, so that's fun. I live in Seattle. What else do you need to know about me? Oh, I had brain cancer a few years ago, which I tell people that because if you Google me at all or like read anything I've written, it'll come up really quickly. So yeah, that's another thing that's in my life.
Now, I just want to, kind of jump off from what you're talking about with that, because for me, that was like the most, I think, salient point looking at all your work, because it was such a big, it must have been, I can only imagine the biggest part of your life. And I just want to ask you, what was that like for you when you were diagnosed in 2017 with terminal brain cancer? As a spouse and parent, I can sort of try and imagine it, but I don't think I really can get the whole big picture. What was it like for you to begin on this journey?
Well, it's, turns everything completely inside out immediately. You get a diagnosis like that and it just puts everything into focus. It means that really everything I had built up until that point, all the things I thought were next in my life, like the next book I wanted to write or what was next to my career, nothing. It just puts everything into focus of like, all I wanted to do is spend time with my children and my husband and try and get well. And, it just sort of turns everything inside out. Like it makes nothing else matter at all. And so as someone who sort of has defined myself certainly through like my 20s and 30s, at the end of those now, by my job. And that was like a really big deal. And I've worked really, really hard. And then to have something like this happen where you're just like, oh, how I spend my days actually doesn't matter. The only things that matter are my relationships. And that was a really clarifying point.
For me, I think that, because I'm sure your spouse was with you all the way through it, so you probably didn't really have to even tell them necessarily, but how do you tell your kids? That's for me, though, I think would be the hardest part of the whole thing. It must have been pretty harrowing.
Well, I was very, very fortunate. My husband is like wonderful and very, very smart. And we were connected with a book right away that defined our perspective and how we were going to handle it, which is, I can't remember the title. I'll happily give it to you and have you share it in the show notes though. It is basically, the philosophy is tell your children everything that is developmentally appropriate for them to hear, and then only tell them as they ask questions, kind of like you tell them the truth and then you tell them what is appropriate. And actually that is what led me to write my first children's book called Lasting Love, because my son, who was then 4 at the time, my older son, I mean, I had a 1-year-old who wouldn't have remembered me if I had died when they told me that I would. So we were telling him, like, mommy has this brain tumor and I have to have surgery. And it was so amazing. He turned to me without missing a beat. I remember it was at the breakfast table and he said, "Mommy, it's like your brain is a garden and you have a weed in your brain and they're going to take it out." And I was like, yes, that is exactly what it's like. Thank you for giving me the words to tell you. And so that was sort of how we talked about it in the future. And so basically after that, random questions just like that, or random like moments would happen where it would just be like, kind of smack you upside the side of the head. I'd be like walking up the stairs with him and he would be like, "Mommy, I'd really miss you if you died." And you're just like gutted and, you start to cry and hold, like you have to be prepared for that sort of thing. It was just a very strange existence. Yeah, I mean, it still shows up, but my results, my MRI results and everything have been so strong. And already I'm 6 years out cancer-free, which is just like a crazy, crazy statistic for someone who is diagnosed with glioblastoma. It has an 100% recurrence rate, and generally people die within a year. So it's not that I'm not complacent at all. I do a lot of, like, my whole life is defined by it. I still live absolutely in gratitude of being alive every day, and it orients every single moment of my existence and my parenting and my cooking and my writing and everything. So.
Now, The Lasting Love was followed up with the Caring Bridge Project, and it's a book about your survival. Did you write this for others going through it to kind of give them a heads up of what to expect and how to get through it?
Actually, well, so the Caring Bridge Project and Lasting Love were both books that I published for my boys for different ages. Lasting Love was the book that I published for them because I didn't see any children's books out there that, called a spade that used words like death, and because everything was metaphorical or religious or, whatever. And that wasn't exactly how we were talking about my cancer to my kids. So I made that book. And then Caring Bridge Project is actually my journal that I kept on Caring Bridge, the website, that really was formative in where my strength and hope came from on a practical level, other than my children, during my treatment. And while I was listening to things like from my doctors who were just saying like, "Yeah, you seem healthy, but you only have like a year." It was hearing things and trying to struggle through every day and figure out where hope came from and everything like that. So I wrote on Caring Bridge, and people were really kind and left amazing, sort of comments and things that buoyed me and carried me through the darkest days.
Now, in your writing, I read that you had an experience, I think, with one caregiver, I think a nurse, who you had mentioned like bringing her cookies and she was looking at you very detached. Do you find that was something you encountered a lot in the medical profession, where you were kind of upbeat and everybody around you was kind of like trying to be guarded?
It's funny that you say that. I still make cookies. I'm actually going in for my biannual MRI on Thursday, and I still make cookies. It's something that I've done since the beginning because my philosophy was like, okay, I have cancer. It's scary and big, but how would I deal with having cancer and seeing people, like for my radiation, I saw them every day for 3 months. And I'm like, well, if Carolyn got cancer, she would bring her team cookies. That's just like what she would do. So like, let's do that. That's the talk I gave myself. And doing little things like that, ritualized practices of like holding on to the self that you are, I think is really important. And your piece of your question of asking whether people were looking at me detached. Yeah, it is a weird thing being treated like, a sack of cells and like test results and things. That's very strange. And I think the most you can do to cling to and express the person that is not that, and doing the things that make you feel like you, is really, really important. Yeah.
I've had many friends who've gone through the journey. Some of them have pulled through. Some of them have not made it. One of them, I remember I had gone to visit her, I think, a few times, and I think I'd always was very somber and serious. And she pulled me aside one day and said, "Listen, I really need you to be a little bit cheerful and upbeat when you visit me. I don't want to be the one cheering you up all the time. I've got enough on my plate." And I was like, the light bulb was above my head. Is that like that a little bit?
Yes. And I was actually really fortunate that so many friends and people I didn't know, so many people in my sphere were reading my Caring Bridge, which turned into the Caring Bridge Project. So the Caring Bridge Project is just all of my Caring Bridge entries bound for my boys to read. So when I was writing on Caring Bridge, everyone I knew was reading it. And that was the place where I got to throw like listen, guys, don't come up to a bald lady and like look at them with tears in your eyes and have the person like have to take care of you. That it's a thing that happens for sure. And it actually still happens, which is why I'm very grateful I have hair now.
Yeah, I've heard that from other people too. Now, through all this, you were named the Soup Queen of Seattle, and you ran soup clubs. Tell us about the title and what the soup clubs were and your experience with this.
Well, so actually, like the Caring Bridge that I was writing, I didn't know how many people were reading it, or we had just moved to Seattle. So it was just like this place that I put all my thoughts and like, wrote everything down and people would read it and whatever. And so when I found out, so not just when they diagnosed the tumor, but when I found out that it was cancer and, became terrified, I was, eating takeout. I'm the cook of the house. My parents moved here and like helped with the kids. My husband was like still trying to go to work so he didn't like lose his job and health insurance and all that stuff. So it was really, really chaotic. And I had this like serious talk with myself being like, okay, you're on steroids that makes you not sleep. You're having brain surgery. You just was diagnosed with cancer. You can't survive brain cancer if you're eating like pizza and, ramen. So you have to get some like homemade food in your life, but how do you do that? So I was like, what is a dish that's people generally have like homemade relationship to? And I said, soup. Like I just sounded a call on this Caring Bridge for soup. That's how people could help bring me soup. And so we just like set out a cooler out front in our front yard, like not knowing if it would get full or what happened. And actually it wasn't as whatever. I had a friend who helped sort of manage the flow of jars. Like she vetted people and made sure it wasn't like, strangers or poisoned or anything like that.
Yeah, I guess that's a good consideration.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, just to make sure my trust, whatever, was well-founded. And so it was really crazy. Like everyone who knew anyone who was reading the blog or the writing in Seattle was tapping someone that they knew in Seattle to bring me soup. So it was like an truly insane amount of soup that came for 3 months until I said like, hey guys, I'm good on soup, like I'm good now. But it defined I've said and written a lot about soup. I mean, it really, for someone who was going through what I was going through and had no access to people and had no idea who these people were, having people show up for you that way was just like a miracle, an actual miracle. And I don't use that word lightly. I'd be sitting there alone and like looking at my soup bowl and imagining like looking at the knife. I'm a professional cook. So looking at the knife cuts and like imagining where this recipe came from. And if they were making a big pot of it for their family and they put a couple jars aside for me, so much humanity was coming through in the soup that just made me feel like I was deeply connected to people and deeply connected to the soup. So when I survived the year I was given to live, I didn't know what I was going to do. All my editors in New York thought I was dying and didn't want to assign me work and things like that. And I survived to a bunch of medical bills. So I decided to do the only thing that made sense, which was make soup for people who made soup for me. And I started this thing called Soup Club, and just literally doing what people did for me, which is bring soup to people's doorsteps and that's what I've done for the past 5 years, and it's grown and grown. And still just like friends, making soup with friends. It's vegan, plant-based. And then I wrote a cookbook last year, with the help of my community, because it's such a weird thing. Like I get like love letters to soup and soup selfies and all this like crazy soup energy. I talked to my editors in New York, of all the publishers I've worked with for my other previous cookbooks. And I just like saw what they saw. They saw a single subject soup book that's vegan, like a picture of soup and page turn picture of soup. And that is just like not what the club is at all. So, I self-published the book first, and the plan was like, to distribute it and whatever. And then on Kickstarter, Simon and Schuster found it. Deborah Madison, the goddess of vegetarian cooking, she saw it and wrote and endorsed it. And I raised over $51,000 and sold it to Simon and Schuster, and it came out last November. As is, like completely the same as the version that I made.
It's done very well, and it's got really great reviews on Amazon. I was really enamored of it because it seemed to really be made by somebody who knew what they were doing as far as soup goes. Because I don't know how many times I've opened up a cookbook and seen soup recipes and they're absolute shit. And it's just like, oh, put some water in a pan, put some, and it's just like, but I saw that there was a lot of thought in this. There was a bean recipe, for instance, that had nutritional yeast. And I'm like, that's fucking brilliant. I love that. And I really thought this is good. Because like, I really thought this had some thought behind it. Was that kind of your idea when you wrote it?
Well, so Soup Club runs from September to May, because I live in Seattle where that's soup season. And it's an original soup every week. So like they have to be different and they have to be fun. So, because otherwise it's just like everyone I know is getting soup every week, and I don't want them to get bored, or me to get bored of soup. So they're all very, very different. They all employ, tricks and creative, fun ideas that I've come up with over the, 15 years of my recipe development and cooking career. And from like roasting vegetables and pureeing them as the flavor base, or cool, additional ingredients like nutritional yeast or homemade curry powders or homemade chili powders or whatever. And it's all, my whole work life has been to protect the home cook, like make things easy and fast. So hopefully they're all like, normal ingredients and not too complicated, and still written the way that I write recipes, which is straightforward and fresh and all those things. But also the big point is that they don't have broth in them, because at first I did a one cookbook for with a chef called Catalan Food, and I channeled him and his restaurant being like, okay, I guess I need to make broth and do this the right way, like to be official or whatever. And that was one time only did I do that, because it was like I had to make, like 80 quarts of broth to make like 80 quarts of soup. And I was like, I can't make soup to make soup. This is really, I just can't. So that really, just like practically speaking, I only have so many pots and it's just really annoying. And so that defined how I make soups too. Like they're only water-based, and I get the flavor, huge flavor from lots of different places. So it's very easy and straightforward.
Do you have a favorite soup from it?
Oh, that's so hard. They're like all my babies.
That's my journalist question there, right there.
Well, I have a few. So lentil soup seems to be the love language of Seattleites, because I don't know, when the pandemic hit, writing a cookbook about beans and stuff. When the pandemic hit, I was having to like race out and buy lentils and beans when other people were doing the same.
Yeah, I read about that. You really had a hard time with that one, like everybody else did. Yeah,
it was awful. Lentils went first though in Seattle, and when I was sick, a lot of people brought me lentil soup. So I have something called the Seattle Springtime Lentil, and to me, it's like my love letter to Seattle and my friends, but also to like walking around outside in Seattle spring when it's like a little bit cold and the flowers are in bloom. And it just reminds me of when I was like in radiation and was walking like 7 miles a day because someone gave me the advice of like, just keep moving, just keep your body going, and, you know, drink water and sleep well and just do simple things that really helped. And walking was one of them. So it reminds me of that like cozy, like slightly chilly, but forward looking, hopeful, fresh kind of time.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org. Now, in 2018, you came out with a book, Catalan Food, Culture and Flavors from the Mediterranean. And you wrote this in 2018, I think a year after you were initially diagnosed with cancer. Well, how did you get to write this book? Where did this come from?
Yeah, that's a funny book. It happened to come out a year after, like right after I was diagnosed with cancer, which actually, yeah, it came out in 2018. The reason why it came out in 2018 is because I was working on it when I was diagnosed. It is a book that I was trying something new. This was my thought. This was my dream book. This was the book that I always wanted to write when I was in my 20s. It was the thing that I was telling myself, like, oh, you've really arrived. When you go to Spain, this is like what food writers do. You know, it's just like the dream book. And then when I handed in my manuscript, that's when I started to get symptomatic. And then I actually had to hand off the edits to a ghostwriter. My name is still on the book and it's definitely still my work, but it's not the project that I dreamed that it would be. And like I said, that was sort of the project that I had to walk away from in order to, survive.
Well, yeah, I was going to mention that Daniel Olivella is the co-writer on that. Was that difficult though to do? Like kind of give your baby up to somebody else to kind of?
Well, Daniel Olivella is actually, so a type of people don't know who aren't cookbook authors. I'm a cookbook author who's generally always done my own original recipes. That's right. Like when you see a book written by Caroline Wright, that's what that means. Daniel Olivella is actually he's the co-author because he's the chef. I was like writing in his voice and like taking his recipes. So that's what that.
Gotcha. I understand. Okay, I misunderstood.
No. That's a co-authored book. And then there's in that case, it being such a weird book that happened when I was sick, there's a ghostwriter who isn't credited, and that's a different situation. But that also happens on books. So if you see a book written by a chef, sometimes there's a person who's actually written the book for that person, but hasn't been put on the cover. And I was a co-author, so I was already put on the cover, but then there was like a new layer of craziness with a ghostwriter that I thank in the acknowledgements and stuff like that. But the book wouldn't have happened without him. It literally would have not happened. Yeah.
What are some of your favorite recipes from this book? And what is it about the food from Spain that inspired you?
Well, like I said, I was living in Dallas and this chef was in Austin, and it was just the dream project of, like I said, being in your 20s and thinking that like what you want to do is go to Spain and write about paella. It was like the exotic piece. It was the piece of being hungry to learn about things that, I had felt sort of separate from. For me, it was like a personal journey of like deciding to do something and really study essentially under someone else, such an expert of Catalan cuisine, and tell his story was really, really inspiring and important to me. And the experience of giving it up was like, actually, I think the true journey of that book for me personally was because, like I said, it was my dream project. And then it's like, oh, well, actually my dream project was, Soup Club and all of the life that I've had since. I had no idea that was ahead, and it looks so different than what I imagined my like dream project to be in my 20s.
In 2016, you wrote the book Cake Magic, a book about baking cakes in many interchangeable varieties. The idea behind the book is that there's some core recipes you wrote, and then there's different things you can do with them. How did you get to write this book?
Oh, I love that book. Thank you for asking about it. It's it's like a deeply editorial book. I love that we're just like going backwards in my chronology. Yeah. So yeah, Cake Magic was my second cookbook that I wrote. It came on the heels of my first cookbook, same editor, and we were just like having dinner and talking about cool ideas of things I'd want to do next. And my first book is mostly all savory, but also a deeply editorial idea. It's $20 20-minute meals. So Cake Magic is quite similar. It's like, again, sort of fast and accessible recipes, but instead of like, and encouraging like from scratch cooking as opposed to like takeout or whatever. So Cake Magic is you make a at-home box mix essentially from like flour, baking powder, sugar, baking soda, and salt. And then you like keep that in your pantry and you pull it out and you turn it into like over 150 cakes by, adding lemon for a lemon cake or chocolate for a chocolate cake. And it breaks all the hard stuff of like what people think of as like the chemistry or whatever. That's not passed on to the reader. It's like all that math has been done for them. And it's just very, very simple. And so the idea is to play and like be creative and stuff. And I was on book tour while I was writing Catalan Food. I was on book tour for Cake Magic, and also became symptomatic during that time of book tour. Writing, your answer was about writing it though. Writing it was really, really fun. It was when I was I had like my first son, and I would write it during nap time, and I understand that. No, it was really, really great. And it's just such a fun book. It was just me like drowning in cakes for about 9 months. It was really insane.
You have some really, really lovely decadent cakes in here. Do you have one that's your go-to?
Oh, well, it's funny you ask. Literally today actually is my oldest son's birthday. Yesterday was my husband and youngest son's birthday. So I do use Cake Magic, this concept, and in practically speaking, I do use it still. And actually what I did after, because I was on book tour when I got sick, essentially, and people were emailing me the way that people do, and you have a new book, they were emailing me like questions about the book or showing me pictures of their cakes and whatever. It was so fun. But I felt really sad because I was like, I don't eat any of these things anymore. It doesn't even feel like my book. Like, yes, I can intellectually, I know all the things about, all-purpose flour and all those things, and chocolate, but I don't eat those things anymore. So I was like really, really dedicated to coming up with a version of the cake mix and all of the instructions for the modifications, sort of like the overlay of the book. I was really dedicated to coming up with a hack to make it something that I could eat and sort of connect with. So I made a paleo, because that's essentially how I eat: no refined sugar, gluten-free, and I don't eat chocolate. But I made a version that I can eat, and a frosting and everything. And I went back to Workman, the publisher, and was like, hey, can I make like a free addendum to the book, like a PDF that people could print out and follow? And so that's the version that, even for my kids' birthdays and stuff, like that's the version that I make so we all can have cake together. And it does adhere, like the philosophy behind the book. I just believe that everybody, whether you're approaching the book from like not knowing how to bake, or whether you're approaching the book with the obstacle of like health or dietary restrictions, or whatever your impediment to scratch baking is, I really believe that this book can solve that in the cake form. So it's very exciting.
I was reading your Amazon reviews, and many people commented on the paleo variations. They were so happy that you did that, because it gave them some flexibility for cooking for themselves and others. And so they were really, a lot of people are very happy about that. So good, well done there.
Thanks.
Now, in 2013, you wrote a cookbook that's near and dear to my heart as a parent who cooks for a lot of people: $20 20-minute meals for 4 people. I can understand how you had the impetus to write this book as a parent, but I'd like to look at your take on it.
Yeah, it's so funny. This book was actually the only book I wrote as not as a parent. It was me as like a 20-year-old in Brooklyn having like my mass of, I have this like amazing family of friends that we had there of like everyone's suffering through their day jobs and like coming over and eating off of paper plates, and me writing a blog while being a freelancer after Martha Stewart, and just like slogging through the days of building your life and your career and just celebrating with your friends like this crazy time, which, you know, you look back on as like a really exciting and adventurous time of your life. So that's really what it was. It was like, it was fast and easy food, and like just learning and understanding that dinner and entertaining and like weeknight dinners can look different, you know, responding to what it like a piece of toast with like a lovely saute of like something that put on top of like fresh vegetables. That's technically a crostini, and it's like a great way to eat standing up in your kitchen, you know. And yes, I mean, it's just how I cook. So yes, I continue to cook like that for my family. Just like they're inherently fast techniques. So there's no like shortcuts or junk food or anything that people associate with like fast food. It's just inherently quick techniques, and leaning into those things and celebrating them.
Yeah, most of it's so very elegant. I think a lot of it was, I don't feel like any of it was like, none of it was kind of like simple. I mean, everything was done very easily, but nothing seemed simple. It all seemed like the kind of stuff you could whip up for guests and they would be really kind of wowed. Was that kind of your take on writing it as well?
Yeah, it's funny. You live the real answer. Yes, I've gotten that comment. And when you live in Brooklyn and you work for food magazines, you live in a funny bubble. So for me, all of those ingredients were like the vocabulary of my regular life. But I do realize that and when I was on book tour going to like, the Midwest and places that have access to different ingredients and their staples are different than say the coasts or certainly Brooklyn. I was learning that it is a little bit aspirational, but even if it is aspirational, the techniques and the recipes themselves are very, as you're saying, sort of standard, but gussied up a little bit, you know, and they are approachable and interesting. And actually that, I guess that's amounted to my kind of food style. That's also how my soups are. They're just exciting in sort of unexpected ways with standard ingredients.
Now, you're additionally very well known as a children's book author. I think probably largely by bookstore owners and librarians. You have quite a name with your many children's books. I didn't want to just go down a list with them like I did with your cookbooks. Can we just talk a little bit about your children's books and how you got to write them?
Sure. Well, so my first book, I've sort of told you the story of that one of, not finding a book out there that spoke to my possible death for my children. And that's really where it started. And then I have a friend who actually she's amazing, an artist. I just happen to know her here in Seattle, Willow Heath. And so I like approached her and just said like, hey, this is a book I really want to make. I need to make it. Like, I'm not looking to pitch it. It didn't come from that place of wanting Random House to pick it up. It just was like, I need this book to exist. I practically have to read it to my children. And then so I funded it on Kickstarter and did a like 1-for-1 project. So like every book bought, another book would be given to an organization for a bereaving child. And so that went really well. And I made this book and it was called Everlasting Creature. And then Random House found that they wanted to change the name for their own reasons and change a few things about it, very minor. And then add a little note from me at the back of it. And that came out, right after my year deadline, my year prognosis. And then after that, I was like, okay, so I have a very clear philosophy on how I talk to kids about death and like my kids. And then I, did some talks on that and whatever. And it's just like, it's not that it's not important. It's absolutely 100% important. But I also believe that like the life and connection to your family is like in the fun stuff, right? In the in the more typical, in what I do in cooking for my family and everything like that. So that's why my next series of books, it's called Little Bakers, came from HarperCollins. They're board books, and it adheres to the philosophy of just like how I've lived my life with my children, which is like always get them in the kitchen, and it's done through this series of like characters, the little bakers who cook through a very staple, easy recipe and an easy poem in like a typical preschool lesson. So it starts with a 1, 2, 3, 4 cake, count and bake book, which is based on, I don't know if you know it, but there's a cake called a 1, 2, 3, 4 cake. I did not make it up. It's like a Depression era cake that uses the numbers equate to measurements.
Oh, nice.
And yeah. And so I was like, why is there not a counting book to do with this cake? It makes so much sense. And so that's how that book came. And then I made a series out of it. By the second book is a cookie, like a 5-ingredient sugar cookie that uses cookie cutters as shapes. And then it teaches the names of the shapes for preschoolers. And then the third book is an ABC book that uses a very, very simple brownie recipe. But in all of these books, the little bakers, like, it's sweet little poems that you're meant to read out loud and hold with your kids. And they're a slightly larger format. So they're meant for like littler hands. And the parent or guardian or grown-up is meant to bake the recipe with the little one with the recipe on the back. And so those are books that I really wanted to make, and I'm so grateful that Allison Oliver, whose art illustrations I really, really love, she got like paired with the project, and they're just like the most adorable books ever, and I'm just so grateful that they're out in the world.
I really love them, because I work in a public library, and there's not many at all. I mean, if it ain't, there's not any really books like this at all, and especially board books. And I can imagine, I see kids come in every day, they get the same books in day out because they love them and they like to see them again and again. Have you got any feedback from parents or kids about the books?
I have, and the people who I've heard from just love it. Like you said, it's just meant to be that. It's meant to be, the way that you cling to a favorite recipe. And it's really, truly a gift, like to a little child, that they have this like relationship both with the recipe and with their adult that they're baking with. And the book kind of holds those pieces in a tangible form, which is just like such an honor to be the person who got to put that out into the world. That's so great. And that's what, I hear that from people, that it's just really beloved books.
I just love the idea that, this could really kick off some cooking career, and somebody later on could be thanking you in their memoirs, I think this is magical.
Thanks. That would be the best possible version of a future that I could imagine too, for a reader of that book.
It's funny because I was talking with somebody last week about this, because many of us remember our first cookbooks, and when they're children's cookbook, my first cookbook was a children's French cookbook. Did you have a first cookbook when you were young, or anything that inspired you when you were younger?
Yes, actually, my favorite book as a child was I think it's called Chez Fanny, but it was the Chez Panisse.
Yeah.
Yes, but it was illustrated and was like had long form sort of stories, and I remember just poring over that. And also the typical like Betty Crocker a cake book I remember very distinctly. And this is before I like really had an identity too much as a cook, because I just was someone who just cooked and baked because that was like fun, and it was like kind of like a magic that you had control over, taking disparate things, putting them together that created something else. It was like very excited for like a very creative little kid. And people like, fawn all over the child who does that. So it was like very exciting on all levels.
I remember that Betty Crocker cake book. Is that the one with the ghost cake with the eggshells and you put a sugar cube in the eggshell for the eyes and light it off with which I can't imagine the kids could do, but I think the parents did. Is it that one?
That sounds familiar. The cake that I really remember most was like, you took, all of my cakes were chocolate as a child because I was crazy about chocolate. Still am, but don't eat it. It was you take like a layer cake recipe and you make one layer out into a circle cake, one into a square cake, put the square cake on a diagonal, cut the round layer in half and turn it into a heart.
Aww.
And so I made that a lot as, as a child.
I love that.
Yeah.
Who are some of the cookbook authors or food writers that you like to read?
Oh, well, I am very fortunate. I love, obviously, the New York Times, everything that they come out with. I also really love like the New York Times cooking. So currently, that's what I love to read, the newsletter and everything like that, and their app. I think they do an excellent job. My mentor, Anne Willan, how I got into cookbooks and things like that. People don't really know about her, or the people who do. It's like a secret code we all have. It's like I know kind of what their background is when people know who Anne Willan is, but she's an amazing, amazing cookbook author who was sort of the Julia Child of French cooking to like England. But she's truly amazing and incredibly prolific, and her recipes are amazing, and her storytelling and writing is really great. And I feel like she's not as known as some of her colleagues and not as celebrated, but she's amazing.
Now, I wanted to ask you this question. This isn't scripted, so we can edit this out if you don't like it. I wanted to ask you, I've seen that you've worked for Rachael Ray and Martha Stewart and Food Network. Have you gotten to meet any of these people or anybody from the Food Network at all? You meet any celebrities?
Yeah, well, what's fun, a little bit of what I was saying about the co-authoring thing, a lot of these, personalities, they don't have the time to write their own recipes. So you sort of study their style. And then, I was fortunate in New York to work at Martha Stewart as a staffer. That's your job. You write recipes in the style of the magazine that you work for. But then at, the Food Network and things like that, you work in a test kitchen and you're just like assigned certain recipes, testing or developing. You're just sort of working on a project that whatever it is that you're working on. And cooks, like personalities would come through all the time. And I was lucky enough to meet a lot of them, but you just realize of course, I get to see behind the curtain, I get to hear their stories of like how they got to be there. And it's all very, very similar to everybody that I'm working alongside, right? They just like happen to get plucked out of, they're doing the same things that we all do. And then they just like happen to land there, and they have their own ways of working in their teams and things like that. It's like really fascinating. And it doesn't feel like I'm meeting this, like, it just feels like a really normal thing. I don't know. That's not a good answer. That's not the answer you want, I'm sure.
No, it's good. I like that. And I think that's true. I mean, I never really knew what to make through so many of these authors over the years. And Rachael Ray was always an enigma to me. And then she came out with her recent book, This Must Be the Place. It had like some sort of semi-autobiographical work in it. And I was like, wow, I really like this woman. She's pretty fucking amazing. So I was really impressed. So yeah, I don't know. I think they're pretty cool people. And Martha always continues to impress me. I really like her. So
Martha is someone, she has a varied reputation out there, depending on who you ask. But I mean, there is a reason why she is who she is and like has had the success she has. Working for her, you work with like an incredible team of creatives who, I mean, it was like grad school working for her. I mean,
wow.
it was truly like I was like a sponge soaking up the environment and how the standards that you work under when you work there, like defined my life. And I'm so grateful that I got to do it at I was like 21 when I worked there. It was like my job right out of culinary school. And it was awesome. It was truly, in the real sense of the words, it was awesome. Every day was just really exciting, and so much learning, and just, I'm so grateful that I got to work there.
Now, Caroline, what's next for you?
Thanks for asking. I'm currently working on a sequel for Soup Club, my cookbook. And that's sort of what that's what I'm working on right now. And then I have other children's books and like possible memoir at some point, fun things, lots of fun things. You can't stop me.
Good. I don't want to stop you. I would encourage you. One last question. What's the first rule of Soup Club?
You're not the first person to say that to me. Yeah, I guess it's not, you're not supposed to talk about Soup Club, but no, but you are supposed to talk about Soup Club.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
I want everybody talking about Soup Club then.
Yes.
Caroline, thank you for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you being with me today.
Oh my gosh, the pleasure was really mine. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well,
that was my interview with Caroline Wright. You can go to her website, and also we have links to her books in the information in the bio. Next week, we're going to be talking to Alexandra Crapanzano. She has a new book out that's going to be out next week, Gâteau, The Surprising Simplicity of French Cakes. You can listen to her next week, and also maybe go to the link in the bio and purchase her book as well. I'll be also putting up a review for her book additionally next week. We want to thank you for listening to the podcast. If you want to share this with a friend, you can share this on social media. We're always very welcome of that. We want to thank Asian Man Records for letting us use the song Talk About Love in our intro and outro. You can go to asianmanrecords.com and look up the information on the bands that they host. You can buy some of their albums and bumper stickers and t-shirts. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Keep on cooking.
I've been getting better.